at a huge financial cost, all to escape the malicious attentions of their manager. Cooperation with performance management is a requirement of the Croke Park deal. At last week's meeting, management advised of their plan to roll out performance management over the coming months. It is intended in nursing that C&M2s will be responsible for managing and evaluating the performance of their staff. Where poor performance is identified, staff run the risk of losing increments or having them withheld. Discussions will continue and will focus on defining the process, the provision of training and the establishment of safeguards. Clearly, we will insist on the right of our members to dignity at work, to protections against intimidation and manipulation, to respect and objectivity in evaluation of performance. We must also, though, examine this challenge in the context of what this will present to the C&M2 and others involved in performance evaluation at a time when they are so short-staffed and are pushed to the limit in trying to cope with the impact of appalling cutbacks in frontline services. Colleagues, moving on, the former minister had intended bringing a new Nurses Act through the Dáil. Time ran out for her. We must now hope that the new minister will in due course review the legislation as currently drafted. While we were able to convince the department to moderate and adjust some of its terms, we believe difficulties still remain. The proposed amalgamation, or the amalgamation now, of the National Nursing Council and An Bord Tánaiste is consistent with the policy of abolishing quangos. However, up to now, the Department of Health and Children has funded the National Council. Nurses fund An Bord Tánaiste. There's little doubt but that some will see this as an opportunity to offload the cost of the Council onto the nursing profession. The proposals in relation to an enhanced fitness to practice process is welcome, but a proposal that hearings will be held in public is not one we can support. Even from the board's point of view, public hearings will deter witnesses from coming forward. But it will frighten the life out of any nurse facing the prospect of having to defend themselves in a public forum. We have seen a number of cases in which serious allegations were dismissed following lengthy investigations. And the accused nurse suffered huge stress in the course of the investigation process. Indeed, families have also complained of the stress associated with the case. In some cases, nurses were suicidal and needed the help of colleagues, of psychiatrists and counsellors. Imagine the stress that will emerge in public hearings. Very often, the reputational damage will be done long before the nurse is cleared of the charge. We can have little complaint if details of a case in which a nurse is found guilty are publicised. However, we must protect the innocent, who are always innocent unless and until found guilty at the end of a fitness practice hearing. We must call on the Minister to ensure hearings continue to be held in camera. Colleagues, over the last year, as we've heard over the last 2 days, this union has undergone seismic change, while at the same time protecting the core principles that brought our founders to the point where they decided to break away from their general trade unions to form the PNA. On this, our 40th anniversary, we can proudly say we have offered a hand of friendship and comradeship to our fellow frontline workers in the ambulance and firefighting services. We are committed to developing our frontline alliance. Since December, we have focused on building critical mass. Now we will work towards building a representative relationship with the employers. I want to say to those employers, we are not going away. We are building strong structures. We are here for the long term. We are here because the members want us here. We say to those employers, in many areas, we now represent more firefighters and more paramedics than any other union or combination of unions. We are delighted in many areas the leaders of IFESA and NASRA are the former conveners of their own trade unions who grew frustrated, who sought a new home, and who have now been joined by so many of their peers within the PNA. I have been delighted to attend many meetings with the firefighters and paramedics in recent months. I have witnessed their frustration. I have come to understand that were it not for our forefathers, we could well be sharing their frustration, anger and annoyance. Some people sought to characterise the decision of those raised to seek membership of this union as a knee-jerk reaction to the strictures imposed by Croke Park. That was never the case. These workers understand that we are now operating in a very difficult environment, that the opportunities of the past are no longer available. that we're struggling to stand still. However, even in these times, there are battles to be fought, interests of members to be represented, grievances of members to be aired. There may be no pay claims to pursue right now, but at times of cutback and retrenchment, equally important work has to be done to protect the health and safety of staff, to ensure safe practice, to protect society from the often daft policy of those managers who were nowhere to be seen when monies for development were available, but licked their lips at the prospect of cuts. I have been impressed by the decency and honour I've met in these workers who are committed to public service. I look forward to working with you, the representatives, in building this union into a bigger, stronger and more influential advocate for our frontline public servants. Colleagues, one of the benefits won in 99 strike is the entitlement of nurses who have been awarded a postgraduate qualification and who are using that qualification in the course of their work to be paid a qualification allowance. Now, the qualification has to be certified by An Bord as being Category 2 or equivalent. And the issue of equivalence is particularly relevant to RPN and ID nurses, as many courses relevant in these areas of practice are open to all professional grades, and nurses are often in the minority. As a result, some colleges and universities see no benefit in going to the bother of seeking Category 2 approval. Their only concern is to fill the available places. Up to 2005, any individual nurse who completed one of these courses was entitled to apply directly to the board to have their course evaluated. But since then, the board have refused to provide individual validation. As a result of our success in the Labour Court, it was deemed the responsibility of the HSE to provide a system which ensures that a nurse can have his or her course evaluated. An Bord have agreed to consider all outstanding claims up to the end of 2011. Now, that may still leave us with a problem post-2011. However, at this point, our concerns must be to ensure that all nurses with a qualification which has not been ratified make application immediately. Over the last few months, I've come across a number of nurses, a number of new claimants, some of whom had qualifications going back several years, who, for some reason, hadn't applied. They must have been very well off if they could turn down $3,000 a year, and some of them would now be arguing they're entitled to $15,000 back money. We battle getting that in the current environment. But the bottom line is, we, as representatives, must ensure that all potential claimants are aware of their entitlement. I want to refer to the Chairman also did yesterday, the decision of the last government to cut the pay of our fourth-year students, which was an appalling decision, vindictive, exploitative, abusive and anti-woman. We will remember Mary Harney's period as Minister for many reasons, none of them good. But this was most surely her most cynical act. Mind you, it did provide me with the most bizarre experience of my life in industrial relations. When at the LRC hearing, I asked a very simple question: Are the student nurses employees when they're on their internships? And I was told, no, they're not. So I said, okay. I asked a follow-up question, or follow-up questions about their status, including, well, if they're not employees, on what basis are you deducting PAYE and other charges? If they're not employees, on what authority are they acting when in psychiatry they assist in the restraining of patients or placing patients in seclusion? Perhaps they're volunteers. What are they? And then I was told, yeah, they are employees. Yeah. We then adjourned to allow the employers to consider the many points put to them. After half an hour, there was no progress, but the chairman came back and said, you won't believe it, he said, but they've now decided that they are not employees. So we protested this nonsense, and before the end of the hearing, they confirmed they are employees, but different. Now, you might well ask why this management team, supported by senior officials from the Department of Finance, could find it so difficult to answer a simple question. I have to assume it relates to the fact that the government's decision to cut and abolish the students' pay would effectively breach Irish law. And the question then is, how could it justify the government paying some of their own employees below the minimum rate of pay when the same government has decided all other employers must pay at least the minimum or above. It just didn't make sense. So now we know they are employees, just different. Now, as you were told yesterday, some days later, the Taoiseach, having taken over from Mary Harney, and announced a decision to review this whole area. I want to say again that we expect our interns to take on all the responsibilities of a staff nurse, albeit under supervision when they come onto our wards and units in place of staff nurses. We expect them to assist and support us during critical incidents. We set them high standards to achieve in the workplace. We insist that they bring their new knowledge, their commitment and enthusiasm, and their energy to a role which will often be difficult and challenging, and yes, will carry some risk. We don't want yellow pack service, and we won't accept yellow pack pay. In the absence of contact from the Department of Children and their reps in recent weeks, we asked the LRC to reconvene a conciliation hearing. However, we were subsequently contacted by the Department inviting submissions to their review, which has now been undertaken, which is focusing on, and listen to this, focusing on the level of pay, if any, which would be appropriate, and then goes on to refer to possible changes to the replacement ratio or other relevant variables given the need to achieve equivalent savings. We will, of course, engage with the Department. We will seek to be innovative. However, the reference to a possible further dilution in nursing numbers at the coalface of care is astounding and reflective of a department which is out of touch with the reality of life on the front line, the daily challenges, even crises, which occur on the front line. So much a reality in the delivery of frontline nursing care. The Department have also advised of a review to be carried out of the degree programme itself, including possible changes to clinical placement arrangements, curriculum content, and the 5 specialised points of entry. Now, colleagues, I ask you, how many more reviews are we going to have of the points of entry? The approach of the Department and the employers reminds me of the IRA years ago saying, we only have to be lucky once. Because over the last 15 years, there have been reviews by the Commission of Nursing and by An Bord Ultránis. On each occasion, the principles involved commenced from the predetermined position that it would be good to reduce the points of entry and to abolish the RPN and the RNID, to create the generalist, all-singing, all-dancing nurse. When the Commission sent a group to Australia to examine nursing in their health services, they were shocked to find that the generalist model was a disaster, that graduates were not competent to work in psychiatry and qualification, that in Australia they had to introduce an expensive postgrad training course to compensate, that to get a competent nurse in Australia took 5 years of training. An Bord then carried out an international literature review and again concluded that the separate points of entry should continue. I know as President Horatio, I listen on a regular basis to representatives from many European countries who lament the deficits in their systems, in their services. I see Finland and Cyprus currently reviewing their systems because of the deficit in the generalist model. Malta are proud of their development in recent years of separate specialist training for mental health nurses. And here we have a good system. We are envied by many other countries. And yet there are those who want to change to a model which has failed in other parts of the world. As pointed out by the Chairman yesterday, we, together with Health Service Management, are currently reviewing the RPN role and practice to ensure that it will be fit for purpose to respond to needs of consumers for the next 20 years. Our focus is consistent with and respectful of specialism, and now our department is intent on reviewing the very essence of our preparation for practice. No wonder the health service, in its various managerial manifestations, is so often described as dysfunctional. Colleagues, on a brighter note, the next Horatio Festival will be held in Stockholm in September next year. The first call for abstracts will issue in the coming weeks. I hope many Irish nurses will present their work and research at the festival, that many of you will be able to attend, and I have no doubt but that we in the PNA will be able to allocate some bursaries to assist some of you, our delegates, to attend. How can you say no now? In fairness, we've been very lucky in that the Officer Board in recent years has felt it important to provide opportunities to people, to delegates at conference, and perhaps next year we'll have a draw for people to attend that festival in